What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's finest on YouTube, blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the incredible folks at NerdTease, and welcome to Lucky Week number 13, a baker's dozen, if you will, of my weekly CFL football pick show for the 2019 CFL season. And last week, had ourselves a pretty good week. 6-3 across our CFL picks from week 12, including going a sparkling, perfect 3-0 straight up, and 2-1 against the spread. Once again, struggled on the totals, but what else is new? 6-3 last week has us 82-55 across all of our CFL picks from the 2019 season. We're 33-13 straight up, 28-17-1 against the spread, and 4 games under 500, 21-25 on the totals. Overall, 59.42% across all picks, including 72% straight up and 61% against the spread. So we're right where we want to be on both of those. Just got to work on the totals a little bit. You may notice the episode is a little bit late. I mentioned that on Twitter. Scheduling was such that I had to kind of push my recording until the afternoon. But you know me. I take my CFL brothers and sisters very, very seriously. I always want to do the best that I can for you. I have pulled off a massive, massive coup for this week. Special guest this week, the guru of the 110-yard gridiron himself, Dave Milhouse, will be on the show this week. He's going to be talking about that Edmonton and Calgary rematch. That'll be towards the end of the show. The man, the myth, the legend himself, Dave Milhouse, is on this program this week. Stay tuned because you don't want to miss it. Standings in the CFL remain basically unchanged, but it is getting into that log jam situation that we kind of talked about in the West Division. I mean, you've got Winnipeg leading it at 8-3, Saskatchewan on that blistering 6-game win streak, now 7-3, so they are right behind. Then you got Calgary and Edmonton, who both have 6 wins, and there is going to be a battle right down to probably the last couple of weeks of the regular season to see which one of those teams is likely to get the crossover into the East Division. In the East, it's a little different. Hamilton is almost into a win coupled with a Montreal loss, and Hamilton may basically lock up the division. I mean, it's getting very, very close here. 1 or 2 more wins for Hamilton will probably get it done. They sit at 9-2, Montreal at 5-4. So Owls obviously have a ton of work to do if they have any aspiration whatsoever of catching the Ticats. In the official Atlantic Schooners CFL fantasy football pool, didn't do great last week. It's like our 3rd straight week or something like that, kind of being on the negative end of things, down to 33rd out of 70 in that pool. Only brought in 54 points in week 12, another really subpar performance. That has me at 938.6 points overall, and we're starting to get into that territory where, man, if you don't start doing something special, you got no chance at like a top 10, much less, pushing for a championship. My week 12 MVP very easily goes to Shaq Evans of Saskatchewan. Again, I made some changes after the news came out that Bo Levi-Mitchell would be starting in place of Nick Arbuckle for Calgary. So I added Shaq Evans to my roster. He brought in 6 catches for 81 yards and a score in Saskatchewan's win last week. That was worth 20.1 fantasy points. He was my MVP. Week 13 CFL fantasy roster, such as it is in front of your eyes right now. We're finally taking the opportunity to jump on Vernon Adams, and unfortunately we're jumping on him when his cost is basically the highest, over $10,000. We're stacking him with Quan Bray, who I think, along with Eugene Lewis, has basically developed the best rapport with Vernon Adams at quarterback. We got a nice running back 1-2-3 punch here of William Powell. We got Augustine will be making his 2nd straight start in place of Andrew Harris before he comes back from suspension, and Kadeem Carey, who absolutely ran wild last week against Edmonton. And we're running with no defense this week simply because I wanted to spend the money on the quarterback position and, just cascading it down the rest of my roster. That is your Week 13 CFL fantasy roster. And your Week 13 schedule of games looks like this. We got the BC Lions traveling to Montreal to take on Vernon Adams and the Alouettes. We've got Toronto traveling to Ottawa to take on the REDBLACKS. We've got Saskatchewan in Winnipeg taking on the Blue Bombers. And we've got Calgary in Edmonton taking on the Eskimos. The latter 2 games, rematches from last week. So let's get started in Montreal with that Lions-Alouettes matchup. The Lions falling to 1-9 in Week 11, losers of 6 consecutive games, and in the last 4 being outscored by a full 11 points, 31-20. The offense isn't kicking, and the defense isn't kicking either. They did only lose that game against Hamilton back in Week 11 by a field goal. It was only 13-10, and to be perfectly honest, the Lions probably mostly deserved to win that football game, but again, no quarterback protection, you're not going to win. They did fire their offensive line coach, but how much of a difference that actually makes certainly remains to be seen, and it would be the biggest question mark hanging over this team. But to be perfectly honest, what else do you expect me to say at this point? We've been talking about it all season, and it hasn't changed. Protect your damn quarterback. Bring extra blockers in. Whatever you have to do, protect your damn quarterback. You got Mike friggin' Riley back there. I don't know if you've forgotten you got one of the best quarterbacks in the league back there, and you blatantly refuse to give him any protection. Shout out to a couple of defensive players on the Lions that have been balling out over the last couple of weeks. Defensive back Gary Peters, he picked up 2 interceptions off of Dane Evans in that game back in Week 11 against the Ticats. And Sean Lemon on the defensive line. Since the trade over from Toronto back to BC, he's had 2 games. He's racked in 5 tackles, 3 quarterback sacks, and forced a fumble. So he's certainly enjoying life back in the orange of the BC Lions. The Alouettes are 5-4 on the season, winners of 2 consecutive games. In the last 4 games, they're even money at 2-2. Scoring is even money as well, 26-26. They've gotten it done 2 of those 4 games, including 2 weeks ago, beating Toronto in Touchdown Atlantic in Week 11, winning that game 28-22. Obviously, that game was far from a clinic. The fact that it was only a 1-possession game against what I feel is a significantly inferior opponent, top to bottom in the Toronto Argos. But look, they made the plays they needed to make when they needed to make them, and they came up with the win. Just another day at the office for Vernon Adams, man. What an impressive stretch that he has been on here. He's averaged 371 yards passing and 2 touchdowns passing over his last 2 games. He also has 5 rushing touchdowns in his last 3 games. This boy is putting points on the board, and he has made me a believer in this Alouettes team. And also, if you're Montreal's coaching staff, is it time to start looking at this team with the mindset of it like a true running back by committee? And this is nothing against William Stanback, but, to Stanback plus a healthy mix of Jeremiah Johnson plus what Vernon Adams is able to do on the ground, is that ultimately what benefits this team best? Because you could throw William Stanback out there for 20-25 carries a game, but if he gets injured, if he breaks down, then you don't have the Jeremiah Johnson behind him that's used to, a significant number of live reps game in and game out. I just feel like swapping those 2 out and having a little more of a balance between the 2 of them, I think that benefits the team. This is very simple here. BC can't protect their quarterback, and I will take an even money home play over a defensively liable road play any day of the week. So I'm going to be on the Alouettes in this one. Let's take Montreal at home to pick up the win over the BC Lions. On the line, Montreal favored by a full touchdown, though, in this football game. Montreal -7, and I think I got a hedge on that one. That's just too many points for me for an Alouettes team that I think is good, but they're still giving up a few too many points for my liking, so I just think 7 points is too many. I think BC gets their points in this game, and look, the path exists that BC could win this game outright. So we're going to hedge, we're going to take the Lions plus the 7 points against the spread. Total in the game set at 51.5 points. I personally have this capped at around a low to mid 50. So probably a few points over this. The 2 teams are combined 11-8 on the over-under so far this year. They're also combined 9-6 when the point spread falls somewhere between 48.5 and 55, which is a really popular area for CFL spreads to fall. I just got to lean on the over on this one. We're going to take over 51.5 points in Montreal, BC. Let's go to the battle of the 2 not very good teams in Ontario. The Toronto Argos traveling to Ottawa to take on the REDBLACKS. Both of these teams have lost their last 3 consecutive games. Toronto dropping a 38-27 decision in Hamilton last week. Ottawa back in Week 11 getting blown out in Saskatchewan against the Riders. Sorry, I had to look and see where that game was. 40-18. That Argos game in Hamilton was the second straight football game that the Argos had a lead and get clobbered, absolutely clobbered in the second half. They were outscored 27-3 after halftime in that game against Hamilton last week. They had a lead. They looked like the better football team through the first half, and in the second half, they completely fell apart. And when I say completely fell apart, the Argos registering only 6 first downs that were not achieved by penalty in the second half of that football game. Guys, football games are 60 minutes. I don't know if you got the memo. They're 60 minutes, not 30. It was another clean game for McLeod Bethel-Thompson, didn't throw an interception, and MBT is not the problem, obviously, with this team. He has performed incredibly well. The wins just haven't been there, but it certainly has not been for lack of trying from the quarterback position. But the question is that enough anymore? Like, I could see them... I mean, it's not going to be Collaros. They're going to shut Collaros down for the year. There's absolutely no point in a lost season to put Zach Collaros out there to get concussed again or get hurt, and then, look, that's probably his career. So I think he's done. I could see them benching McLeod Bethel-Thompson for their other backup, whose name absolutely escapes me right now, so I apologize if he happens to be watching. Ottawa's loss in Saskatchewan last week definitely answers the question that I was asking in the Week 11 video. Like, hey, I don't know what this team is. Is this like an okay team that's just not getting the result? No, the question's been answered. The Ottawa REDBLACKS are a bad football team. If you have a game where you have to run out all 3 quarterbacks that you have on your roster, Dominique Davis, Jonathan Jennings, who is starting the game this week, Dominique Davis has been benched, Jonathan Jennings starts. You have those two, and then you have Schultz. Is it Schultz? Schmaltz, something like that. You got to run out all 3 quarterbacks. It hasn't been a good night. Like I said, Jonathan Jennings starting at quarterback. Who's starting in the backfield? Is it going to be Moses Madu? He certainly hasn't, outside of, I think, one game, he hasn't really shown me anything in that position at the starting running back. And what is this defense? Does this defense have anything for anybody? Does this defense have anything for an Argos offense that's actually putting up points? Look, both teams are on 3-game losing skids. Somebody's got to win, unless the game ends in a tie, but somebody's got to win. And at least, again, the Argos are scoring points and getting leads in football games. I kind of think Toronto can win this football game. I'm going to take the team that's actually scoring points. Both defenses are bad, but I will take the upside of the Argos offense right now. Let's take Toronto in Ottawa for the upset. Toronto beats the REDBLACKS. On the line, the REDBLACKS are favored by 5 points at home, which seems to me like a ridiculous number. So we're definitely taking Toronto +5 in this one. Obviously, I like them to win. Even if I didn't, Ottawa's only 1-4 against the spread this season at home. I don't see them covering the 5 points, even if they do win. So we're going to take Toronto +5 and feel real confident about that one. Total in the game set at 51.5 points. I think this is pretty close to a perfect total, but I'm going to skew on the under on it simply because, again, Ottawa at home, the over has only hit one time when the total is, once again, within that 48.5 to 55. The over's only hit one time. This is a very low 50. I still think it stays under. We're going to go under 51.5 points in Toronto, Ottawa, and hold our noses while we watch the game. So before we get into the 2 rematches from last week and before Mr. Dave Milhouse comes on to talk to us about Calgary and Edmonton, I'm going to take this opportunity to plug my good friends and sponsors at NerdTees. NerdTees.ca. Promo code is BWFinest. Save yourself 15% at checkout when you use that promo code. If you're in Canada, free shipping on any order over $75, and there's so much goodness, why would you spend any less money than that? If you're in the US, 2 clicks of a button, everything is in US dollars for you, and you get an excellent conversion on the US dollar. Today's blend is a nice dessert tea, lovely cookie dough, smells like a bakery in here, tastes great. Nerdtees.ca, promo code BWFinest. Find yourself something to love or find someone you love something to love. You can do it on nerdtees.ca. Cheers. Okay, first of our two rematches from last week on the docket now. The Saskatchewan Roughriders hitting the road, going to Winnipeg after a 2-point victory in Saskatchewan last week. Saski now 7-3, winners of 6 consecutive football games, and in my opinion, looking like one of the best teams in this league right now. Again, oh God, I love that futures bet that I've got so much. In their last 4 games, outscoring opponents by a measure of 25-16. But again, they only beat Winnipeg by 2 points last week, and I would say they're very happy to survive a football game that feels like they should have been able to win easier than they did last week. The defense has stepped up on both sides in that football game. Not a lot of offense to be found on either side, and I don't necessarily think that Saskatchewan was the better of those two units, but they did do just enough to win. And this is now also the time of year that we start talking about, okay, players that got cut from NFL rosters that you could very well see come back into the fold in the CFL. And Saski, we run across the first player of significance, and that's Jordan Williams Lambert. Last year, 62 catches for over 750 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns in 2018 in the CFL. He could potentially come back to Saskatchewan, who does still own his rights. On Winnipeg's side, they dropped to 8-3 on the season. They're still 3-1 in their last 4. Scoring is not fantastic. It's 27-22, so they're still playing well, but you would expect Winnipeg's margin maybe to be a little bit larger than that. And look, the Bombers got walked off. They got walked off on by a Brett Lauther field goal in like the dying seconds after taking a lead in the final 4 minutes of that football game. They can't help but feel like this was a game that they let slip away. And part of that was the quarterback performance, at least through the air. This is back-to-back kind of negligible passing games from Chris Trevler. Oh boy, I lost his name there for a second. I don't think it's unfair to start asking the question, like, look, Winnipeg right now is in a position where they feel like it's Grey Cup or bust. Can they win the Grey Cup if it's Chris Trevler at quarterback? I mean, if he's going to be at this position for the long haul, especially if he's there still come playoff time, I mean, I don't think it's unfair to ask, like, can they win with this guy? I got no questions about what he can do on the ground. The question marks come through the air. Johnny Augustine, who I mentioned before, who's on my fantasy roster, was on it last week and is on it this week again. Look, he had actually a pretty good job in that first game playing the Andrew Harris role. 12 carries for 98 yards on the ground, added 3 catches for 17 receiving yards. He's just not Andrew Harris, and it's unfair to expect him to be, but I think you'll see him be even a little more involved in the game plan this week. They're going to want to run the ball. You can run the ball on the Riders, so I think they're just going to want to get him a little more involved in the offensive game plan. Wouldn't be surprised to see him go over 100 yards this week. Look, this Bombers team is still an unbeaten 5-0 on their own home field. Certainly not a team that enjoys losing or is used to losing this season. I expect a bounce-back performance from Winnipeg in this one in a big, bad way. I'm actually going to take them in this spot, Winnipeg at home. Let's take the Bombers to pick up the win against Saskatchewan in the Banjo Bowl. We're going to take the Bombers to win this one. On the line, Bombers are only 1-point favorites at home, so obviously we like them to win. It's the smallest of prices to pay, basically. So we're going to lay that 1 point, I should say. Take Winnipeg -1. Total in the game set at 48 points. Once again, I think this is pretty close to a perfect total in terms of how I capped it. The two teams are combined 9-12 on the totals this year, so that is a slight lean towards the under. Winnipeg still has those injuries, still has the suspension to Andrew Harris, so I do think scoring stays down a little bit. I think it's a defensive game like it was last week, so we are going to skew under on the 48-point total in Saski, Winnipeg. And the final game we're going to talk about is that rematch between the Calgary Stampeders and the Edmonton Eskimos. This time it's in Edmonton, but before I say anything, let's kick it over to the man, the myth, the legend, Dave Milhouse himself. Dave, tell us a little about the game.
Hey Justin, thanks for having me. For those of you who don't know, I'm Dave Milhouse. You can find me on Twitter at Milhouse Sports, YouTube and Instagram, House Money Media, and I'm here today to share a CFL play with you. Last year, absolutely crushed it. The year before, crushed it. This year's struggling, but now at least the stats are accumulating and the model can be trusted a little bit more, and we're at the point of the season where I do believe we're going to get things really turned around. We're going to break down the Edmonton Eskimos against Calgary in this rematch. It's another rivalry game. Every year we get the back-to-back scenario here, and we're getting an absolute gift from the market. Now, I say that because we're getting a deal in the market, but this is the CFL where absolute blunder after blunder happens, and that doesn't mean you're going to win just because you have an edge on the line. Got that out of the way? The Edmonton Eskimos are the best team in the CFL, okay? They average the most yards per game, the most passing yards per game. They have the least turnovers, the least sacks, everything clicking for them on offense except for the red zone play calling. Every time they get inside the red zone, they do something that I consider to be so stupid. And it's really, really getting on my nerves and costing quite a bit of money, actually. But I'm not going to give up on them, because as soon as you give up on teams, they get back to where they're supposed to be. So, as hard as it is to swallow at times, we got to keep riding with this best team. As you can see, they're the best in yards against. They give up only 171 in the air per game. Easily the best in the CFL. Leading in sacks. Very low in the picks, but quite a few forced fumbles. This team is damn near the best in points against as well. Top to bottom, this is the best team in the CFL, and after two pathetic performances in a row, the market is really down on them. Bo Levi Mitchell comes back and they light Edmonton up, and now the market is high on Calgary, and a couple points each way gives us quite the edge. I've got this line at 6.5, so to see it at a pick'em or -1 on certain sites is a big mistake in my opinion, and we're gonna take advantage of this. Yeah, so there's not a whole lot more to break down other than, Trevor Harris is the most accurate quarterback in the league, and all the stats we just went through. This is really just a matter of Jason Moss calling a proper game or not. But it's really hard to not get fired up for this game for Edmonton and the fans. The place will be rocking. This will be the loudest it is in Edmonton all year, and the most important game of the year for them on their schedule, without a doubt. Every single year, this is the one. So home field is definitely worth more than average in this spot by at least a half point, in my opinion. And and that's why the line moves up to 6.5 on my model instead of 6. And also, the model has them winning by 7. So, we'll take this at a pick 'em all day, maybe even twice. Best of luck to you, and thanks for having me, Joe.
Yeah. Love that genius. Dave, my dude, thank you so much. We've been trying to get this together for a couple of weeks now. Finally all came together. Thank you so much for being on the show, making your contribution. And remember, it's Dave that moved this line. If I would have recorded this show this morning rather than last night, look, Dave and his guys moved this line a full 2 points, because this was like -0.5 point or -1 for Edmonton at the time. It's like -2.5 to -3 now. So it's Dave's guys and Dave's guys alone that moved this line. He still likes it. And like he mentioned, you can find Dave on Twitter at Milhouse Sports. Find him on YouTube, Instagram, House Money Media. You can find him all over the place. He's a guru. He's one of the best in the game, if not the best in the game. Find him on Twitter, especially at Milhouse Sports. That loss last week was the Eskimos' second straight loss, dropping them down to 6-5. Calgary actually leapfrogging them in the standings. Calgary goes to 6-4 off the heels of that 25-9 victory last week. This game was a defensive clinic for the Stampeders. Their defense played an incredible football game, holding Edmonton to just 271 total yards, 3 field goals, and a big fat 0 on the touchdown counter. And obviously the biggest storyline for the Stamps, Bo Levi Mitchell returning after his injury. First game action since week 3. He has a clean game, goes 19 of 28, throws for 263, finds the end zone, does not throw a pick. Kadeem Carey also returning in this game and dominating on the ground, carrying the ball 16 times for nearly 10 yards a carry. He goes for $143. Speaking of players that could come back off of NFL cuts after tryouts and training camps, Marken Michel could very well return to the Calgary Stampeders, which would give them another weapon on the offensive side. It hasn't been confirmed whether he's going to come back or not, but I mean, he's been very successful in the CFL. On his career, 72 catches, 1,215 yards, and 8 touchdowns. That's a 24-game CFL career. He has been very successful, especially in moving the football. You could see him come back for Calgary. On Edmonton's side, I hope at the latter point in that game, or even about halfway through it, I hope the Eskimos weren't under any delusion that they were going to win that football game last week. That was the most complete loss, I think, I've seen the Eskimos have all season. The offense wasn't good enough. The defense wasn't good enough. The special teams unit wasn't good enough. At no point in that football game did I feel that Calgary was under any threat of losing. Edmonton is another team that could potentially bring back a couple of players, actually. They could really solidify that defense, take a strength, and make it even stronger. There were like 4 players that Edmonton holds the rights to that got cut from NFL tryouts that are currently free agents, didn't get picked up on waivers, didn't get signed to practice squads. 4 players on the defensive side that the Eskimos could potentially bring in to really solidify that defense for a stretch run. And I think down the stretch, I think they're going to need that. You know what? I was more than prepared to take the Stampeders in this game. I found it very difficult to consider taking Edmonton on the heels of like such a dismantling that they had against them last week. But I'm not going to lie, Dave kind of sold me. I'm kind of liking Edmonton in this game now, and maybe I may be allowing the great Dave Milhouse to influence me. However, if that's the case, call me influenced. I actually kind of like Edmonton. I think we're going to take the Eskimos on home field. I think that definitely gives them an advantage, and I think they're going to be mad. Like, they should be mad. They should be mad. They got absolutely beaten up last week. And it's not that they're a significantly worse team than Calgary is. Let's take Edmonton at home to beat the Stampeders. On the line, Edmonton now favored by 2.5 points, like I mentioned, at home. This was originally like Edmonton -1. So again, thank you, Dave, and your guys for moving the number to that degree. But I still like it. It's still a small price to pay. It's less than a field goal. So we are going to take Edmonton minus the 2.5 points. Total in the game set at 47. I kind of got this capped somewhere like a high 40, maybe even a low 50. Even though the two teams are only combined 9 and 12 on the over-under, I am going to go over on this number. Let's go over 47 points in Edmonton, Calgary. There you go, folks. Those are your picks for Week 13 in the CFL. We're going to go over them here with you one more time. We're going to take Montreal at home to beat the BC Lions. But however, we are going to hedge our bets over 51.5 points. We're going to take the Toronto Argos in Ottawa to beat the Ottawa REDBLACKS, and we're going to take the points. We're going to take Toronto +5 in that game, obviously, since we like them to win, in a game that stays under 51.5 points. Same point total in that one. We're going to take the Winnipeg Blue Bombers at home to avenge the loss from last week and beat Saskatchewan. And we're going to hammer Winnipeg -1 against the spread in a game that stays under 48 points. And in the week finale, we're going to take the Edmonton Eskimos at home to beat the Calgary Stampeders, also avenge the loss from last week. We're going to hammer Edmonton -2.5 against the spread in a game that goes over 47 points. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the incredible folks right here at nerdtease.ca. I hope you've taken the time to watch week 1 of my NFL show that just came out yesterday. I'm so happy with how it went. Season 8 of my NFL show and Season 2 of my CFL show. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a perfect Tuesday-Wednesday marriage. I couldn't ask for anything better, and it's 2 straight days of football content for you from this guy. See you again next week in Week 14.